Happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope that you are doing fantastic. I am Andarta. I am a professional psychic as well as a professor of medieval literature. And I just wanted to remind you of a couple things. So, 2 days until my August reading sales drop. So, for non patrons, this would be $65 for 30 minutes and $125 for an hour. You can just go onto my Calendly account and schedule yourself, and I will have you pay in advance to secure that appointment. And then tomorrow evening is my online basic ritual craft class. This is from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. So you can do it from wherever. Just make sure that you are at the correct time. Once you register, it's $20 a person, and the deadline is tomorrow at noon. So once you register, then you will get the link for the video. Okay? Okay, so this video is all about the first harvest, Lunasa, Lammas. This was a very important time of year, and so this would have been August 1st, and those of us that are neo-pagans still celebrate it. And I wanted to talk a few minutes about the importance of it, especially from my book that I had published, The Traditional Holidays During the 15th through 17th Centuries in England. So I really researched a lot of different types of documents when I wrote this book. And I was looking at the different Sabbats, the different holidays, the high days that were really important. And Lammas, Lunasa, this was a very important day. It was considered rent day. It was the first harvest. And so I focused on England from 1425 to 1625, but the practices that were being performed on this day are reflective of much more ancient times of living off the lands. The wheel of the year is what really had people, the actions that people had throughout the year revolved around that. Okay, so Lunasa or Lammas, Llafmas, so there's still a lot of argument amongst scholars as to whether or not it was Lunasa, which would have been Llwsmas, so that is a Celtic sun god, or if it was Llafmas, which would have been Loafmas from the Anglo-Saxon path. I think, honestly, that is probably both, because we had both the Celtic and the Anglo-Saxons settling in medieval times in England, and so it just depended on where the people were living as to whether or not it was considered more Llafmas or if it was Lewsmas. Okay. So this was the first harvest of the year, and it was crucial to the survival of the lower class serfs and farmers. August 1st was rent time. It was made, you made the payments for rent at this time. This would have been especially of the corn, which this is not the United States American corn. This is the corn of, of Europe, of the UK, but it's still called corn, of the different first grains that were brought in, any beginning fruits, but not too many. As well as any animals that may have been used as payment, and maybe some coins. But most lower class serfs and farmers did not have coins necessarily. They made their payments with the different livestock and produce that they gathered in. So if people had a good harvest, then that was a great sign for the survival of the upcoming winter. However, people were ecstatic if they made it to Lammas, because that means that they survived another year. Because, believe it or not, when I was doing this research years ago, I found that the death rates specifically of starvation were higher during late spring, early summer than during winter. And if you think about it, it's like, well, I mean, if you get into winter, you're going to be eating whatever you have in stock. So, but there's still not that many things to eat in spring. that were very nourishing. And so if there was a bad crop that year before, then you did not have enough sustenance to get you through to that next harvest. So that's why Lunasa Lammas was such an important festivity celebration, because that meant that you actually made it to the next first harvest. And also, there were many different Celtic games. That's where the Highland games come from. That it's at this time that if the tribes were not fighting, because, that's what you would do during summertime, is if you weren't fighting, then you were doing games, which were things like, tossing of the logs and, the shot put equivalent, all of that stuff, as well as that this would have been a time for the tribes to get together to trade livestock, crops. Also, that would have been a time when couples would have done a hand fasting, which was a year and a day. People would not do hand fastings or get married earlier in the year. Usually it was around Lammastide that people would give it a shot. And if they didn't get along, if they didn't like it, then they could end it at the end of that year, that next year, and everybody would be parting of ways and it all would be groovy. So a lot different than what we have today, right? Scholars, I already talked about that. So there were a lot of actual riots. So a lot of things that I focused on in my book were the different riots and upheavals at the different Sabbat tides for different reasons. And the riots during Lunasa/Lammas happened because of socioeconomic struggles, believe it or not. The control/ownership of the land versus the people who actually worked the lands were rarely the same. And so, as I wrote in here, the commoners were denied access to work the lands when the arable lands became pastures, often at Lammas, the first harvest, creating hostile situations and peasant revolts. Referring to the riots over enclosure in the 16th century, Alison Walls, this is a famous scholar, analysis still applicable in the situation. The underlying problem was the trend towards enclosure. People tried to stop the change. One method was the enclosure riot. The participants were not merely unruly peasants, but reacting to disruptive changes in agricultural practice. And believe it or not, that's just something that we're still in a different form, but it's the haves versus the have-nots and the vast majority versus the minority who calls the shots and what people can and cannot do. But these riots during Lammas represented that struggle between the social classes. If the landlords/owners of the lands made it into a pasture for sheep or cows or something, then the people that used to work those lands for crops all of a sudden had no work. They had to move. They had to find a new, sometimes they would move into the bigger cities where there was a lot of tension because of especially any of the northern British people, English people, Celtic people that came down. There was a lot of racism against these people in London and the bigger cities because they were there for work because they were kicked off of their lands. And so, boy, that sounds sort of familiar, doesn't it? So the business transactions at Lammas, this is another really interesting thing that I found throughout this research, is that it shows how much agency and social power medieval women held as opposed to early modern women, because I actually have many, many different accounts of the medieval noble women that were they were in charge of collecting all of the rent because their husbands were away doing something, whether it be in the crusades, or if they were down in London for court or something like that. But I always think of the equivalent of the in the tarot deck, the Queen of Pentacles. That is sort of like the epitome of the medieval noblewoman. That she was very well educated. She was very good at managing people, money, things. She knew what to order as far as weapons. She knew how to manage all of her different workers on her lands. And so when we shift to the early modern period, people usually used to call it the Renaissance, women lost a lot of power. You would think that it would have been in the opposite, but it actually shifted gears completely because of religious as well as political issues that happened that is way too big for me to explain in this video. But I just wanted to point out some, very important things that I think that being a historian, we always need to be aware of what had happened in the past as to what are we experiencing now? Are we reliving history or not? What is going on? So I hope that you all have a wonderful Lunasa /Lammas on Friday, and I will see you all next week. All right, bye-bye.